It is sometimes said that knowing the truth brings closure, or that truth heals. The notion that through meeting the other side in conflict, through declaration and response between victim and perpetrator, when some measure of intersubjective truth is established, closure is accomplished. That notion is metaphorical and misleading. There may be the sense that the essential has been said and agreed upon, but the sincerity and completeness of what was said by victim and by perpetrator remain provisional, and each side will always feel that there is more to be said. And agreeing that the essential has been established by no means brings an end to the suffering of the victim, nor does it bring an end to the career of the perpetrator, who is afflicted with the agonizing problem of how to live his or her life now that his or her cause has been acknowledged to be unjust, his or her militancy futile, and his or her status in the community dishonored. The notion that truth heals, that when the victim is given voice to speak and be heard, and when the perpetrator acknowledges the harm inflicted, that the victim's reputation and dignity in the community is restored, this notion is also metaphorical and misleading. When one has been tortured or raped, one's loved ones disappeared, when one has lost years of life in imprisonment, there is no restoration or compensation. When people have suffered a grave physical, psychological, or moral injury, or the loss of those closest to them, they have to harbor this loss, honor and cherish what was lost, and assemble whatever resources are possible to be able to live. To be able to live again, the victim will also have to find material and social resources. Vivid re-experiencing of the event, fear, nightmares, feelings of helplessness, depression, self-blame, relationship difficulties, feelings of social disconnectedness, anxiety, perhaps substance abuse, are all sufferings that may take long-term community support, professional care, and time to diminish, and they may never diminish. Communities and individuals will not seek reconciliation with their formerly armed enemies as long as they are convinced of the overriding justice of their cause and the real possibility of imposing it by violence. And it is illusory and indeed repugnant to seek to induce people to live tolerant and respectful relations with one another when they are being occupied, oppressed, humiliated, and killed by the political and military forces of another. Unless those people can envision and hope for a situation where they would coexist with their enemies without being degraded, humiliated, and oppressed by them, coexistence and reconciliation will not be possible. And truth-seeking also requires certain social conditions. All sides in conflict will have to be open to the possibility that the crimes that they have committed will be disclosed. Their dignity and very identity may be at risk. In order that peoples and communities can take that risk, a certain level of social and cultural security will have to have been established. Confrontation of victim and perpetrator to establish the truth of the past crimes, oppression, and abuses is not the only and may not be the best way to work for restoration of wounded and traumatized victims and reintegration into a community of coexistence. Methods to achieve integration on another plane, a symbolic plane, are widespread across cultures. The sufferer may make some kind of sense of his or her suffering and find resources to begin to live again by situating his or her suffering in the cosmic realm, identifying it with the suffering of spiritual beings or gods, and seeking help from beneficent deities. Since myths and religions are social structures, the sufferer is supported by the religious community and its ministers. Historical figures of victims, of perpetrators, of mediators, of peacemakers also come to exist on the symbolic plane. And peoples and communities seeking a new coexistence will identify with them and understand their situation and their longings through these symbolic figures. The truth However partial and subject to revision of the past conflict is incontestably important for victims who have been dishonored and maligned, for perpetrators who have to come to terms with their past and their futures, for political leaders who have to reconstruct society and build political institutions with parties that have been in conflict, as well as for historians who have to provide humanity with an understanding of its conflicts and disasters. Yet truth must sometimes be traded off against other goods. Since truth can harm people as well as benefit them, sometimes it may be better that some facts about the past remain unknown. The most effective methods for obtaining the truth may violate the rule of law, personal privacy, or the right not to incriminate oneself. Such methods might be too costly in relation to other goals. The joint UN-Cambodia court to try the surviving 5 Khmer Rouge leaders of Democratic Kampuchea, scheduled to last 5 years, has in the first year of its operation cost $170 million. And one could wonder if these sums would not be better spent to provide psychiatric services, health services, schools, and economic aid to the country. Some truths about the past may be irrelevant to reckoning with the disasters and sufferings of people left by past conflicts and crimes. There may be times when, for reconciliation, telling what happened and what one suffered may be less important than not repeating the inflammatory words of the past and the accusatory words of the present. There is, finally, the troubling phenomenon that meetings where the sides in conflict recount the crimes they endured and inflicted may well deepen hostility, arouse waves of revenge killings, increase the level of hostility and violence. When there is generalized violence in a society, that in itself conveys a sense that violence is intrinsic to human nature, promotes cynicism, and produces more violence. Did all the publicized crimes revealed in the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission contribute to this situation? The high level of criminality in South Africa since the end of apartheid has been accompanied by gross human rights violations by the police. Between April of 2001 and March of 2002, 585 people died in police custody or as a result of police action. The torture of criminal suspects by the police continues. A recent survey revealed that 70% of South African respondents of all races agreed, or strongly agreed, with the statement that criminals have too many rights. 31% of all South Africans feel that the police have the right to use force to extract information from criminal suspects. Still, facing one another and telling one's suffering, and telling the deeds one has perpetrated, does bring about an expansion of information and also understanding of motives and suffering. It limits the denial and also the dramatization of suffering, what has been called the triumphalism of pain. It complicates the process of rationalization both perpetrator and victim have had to do. The community and political leaders in projecting future institutions and economic projects will have to take account of how each side saw the situation. But that view can change. After the devastating 1918 civil war in Finland, after the internecine conflict between collaborationists and resistant French after the Second World War, and after the end of the Cultural Revolution in China, as after the end of the Second World War in Japan, there were no institutions set up to establish the truth of crimes perpetrated on fellow citizens. Yet reconciliation between the parties in conflict did take place as the political leadership concentrated on building the future. It is true, the past passes. And there is also the biological renewal. Generations pass, and the new generation will not have all the causes for conflict and for recrimination of the older generation.